Good evening everyone, welcome to Bajirao AS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 19th November 2025 and today we have a list of important topics for our discussion. So here are the list of important topics that we are going to discuss. And these topics are very important for both prelims and mains examination. So we will make an attempt to discuss these topics in detailed manner. And we also have one prelims practice question as well. So this question was given yesterday. The question is, which one of the following statement is correct with respect to fundamental rights? And in fact, the option 1 says fundamental rights are claims of the state against the citizens. This is not true. Option B says rights are privileges which citizens are expected to enjoy as per the wishes of the government. And in fact, rights are available to citizens against the state. Rights are not privileges. And in fact, every human being is entitled to rights. So therefore, option B is also not correct. Option C says rights are claims of the citizens against the state. This is absolutely true. Rights are claims of the citizens against the state. So correct answer for this question is option C. As I have already told you that rights are not privileges granted by the state. So therefore option D is also incorrect. Now in this context, the correct answer for this question is option C. Rights are claims of the citizens against the state. Now an article has been given in the Hindu newspaper about Article 32 of the Indian Constitution. We all knew that Article 32 of the Indian Constitution deals with right to constitutional remedies, which means if any of these fundamental rights are violated, the aggrieved citizen can approach the Supreme Court for the enforcement of his or her fundamental rights. I hope you have understood this. Now going into the topics, the first topic is there is an editorial which has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this editorial is talking about India's cereal mess. So let's understand this topic, but before going into this, from the syllabus point of view, this is very important for General Studies Paper 3, Agriculture. Now let's understand what the author is discussing in this editorial. The context is that recently a controversy has started emerging over paddy procurement in Tamil Nadu, and in fact a short-term Karuai season. Now in this season, paddy procurement has started in the state of Tamil Nadu. However, this controversy has underscored the need to critically re-examine India's overall food grain procurement system. We all knew that the government of India under MSP procures food grains from the farmers. The procured food grains are used to fill the buffer stocks and also ensure that farmers get adequate amount of remunerative prices for this produce, and the procured food grains also supplied to people through the public distribution system, thereby ensuring food security for the people. So I hope you have understood this. However, this particular controversy that has emerged in Tamil Nadu, it has highlighted the need to re-examine India's overall food grain procurement system. So we'll be understanding all these aspects as well. Now in fact, the Tamil Nadu Civil Supplies Corporation, it actually procures paddy on behalf of the Food Corporation of India. We all knew that Food Corporation of India is a nodal agency for the procuring food grains from the farmers. However, in the state of Tamil Nadu State Civil Supplies Corporation procures paddy on behalf of the Food Corporation of India. However, the Tamil Nadu Civil Supplies Corporation, which faced delays, existing administrative gaps, and even allegations of corruption. Now all these problems intensified by predictable rise of nearly 2 lakh acres in paddy cultivation. Now all these problems have led to the inefficiency of TNCSC when it comes to procurement of food grains, and that's why it has been said that there is a need to re-examine India's overall food grain procurement system. However, this issue which has erupted in the state of Tamil Nadu, it actually reflects the broader national pattern. This issue is not just limited to Tamil Nadu, rather it has been reflecting a broader national pattern. Now, in fact, farmers are increasingly find paddy a safe bet because the government has been providing minimum support prices for the farmers for procuring paddy. Right? So, in fact, farmers are also getting assured returns through procurement. However, it has been raising several questions with respect to long-term sustainability of such incentives. Now, if government announces MSP to the farmers, then the government has been encouraging farmers to cultivate certain crops, and it may lead to the monocropping. However, monocropping is not good for the agriculture and also soil fertility as well. So therefore, we should also think about the sustainability of the food crops as well, such as rice. Now let's understand the import of edible oil into India, and we will understand this from some data as well, because India is one of the largest importers of edible oil, because it is the largest consumer of edible oil as well. Now in this context, India's dependence on imports of pulses, edible oils is persistent and it is costly. So I would like to tell you that India is the largest importer and producer of pulses in the world. However, dependence on pulses and edible oils is permanent on the part of India, and it is also very expensive as well. Now in 2024-25, Ministry of Agriculture has provided some data with respect to this. In 24-25, India imported 1.2 lakh crore worth of edible oil and 30,000 crore worth of pulses. However, this is nearly 55% of the edible oil needs are met through imports. Now in fact, you can understand that we have a dependent on edible oil imports amounts to around 55% of total requirement. So that has been indicating that the import of edible oil is permanent, and at the same time it is very expensive as well. However, global disruptions, especially from Russia and Ukraine conflict, sharply increased the import costs, because in fact Ukraine and Russia, they contribute to the largest production of edible oil. However, Russia-Ukraine war has led to a sharp increase in the import cost of edible oil. However, even though the quantities, the imported quantities remained within 135 to 157 lakh tons annually over the past 6 years. However, the domestic oilseed production has stagnated despite a steady cultivation area. Now, in fact, in the year 2014, from 2014 onwards, the annual production has also crossed 400 lakh tons only once, and therefore it has been raising several concerns about the long-term viability of the sector. So therefore, this is the data, and these are the concerns with respect to the edible oil imports into India. But one thing that we can assume from this content and from this data is that edible oil import is costly, expensive, and at the same time India is heavily dependent on imports. So let's understand the systematic questions which are actually raised in this context. Now in fact, this situation has actually raised several pressing questions for India. First, now in fact, if you look at India's rice procurement policy, now rice procurement policy has been made with several challenges. However, rice procurement has been justified historically because if government procures rice from the farmers, farmers will get remunerative prices for the produce, and at the same time this procured rice can also be distributed to the poor households through public distribution system. So therefore, it can be historically justified. However, we need to question the sustainability of rice procurement and distribution of rice as well. And in fact, excessive emphasis on paddy alone would encourage monocropping. And excessive monocropping means it will not be good for the soil health, and it will also worsens the existing water scarcity in regions like Punjab and Tamil Nadu, because crops like paddy are water intensive crops. They consume a lot of water. And secondly, so why have policy efforts to strengthen pulses oilseed production yielded limited results? Because despite there are efforts from the government at various levels to identify the region for the cultivation of pulses and oilseeds, but the results are very limited. Now, in fact, this also failed to reflect the success of 1960s Green Revolution as well, because you can understand that 55% of the edible oils that we have been importing, despite government policies, government measures, we are not able to reduce our dependence on imports of pulses and oilseeds. The third major important factor: should the country continue with the centralized model of procurement, storage, transport by agencies like Food Corporation of India, despite growing inefficiencies of the procurement agencies? So these are the three fundamental questions that have to be addressed in this context. However, it is generally believed that crop diversification is a very important and a strategic imperative for a country like India. We cannot afford monocropping, and we cannot depend on few crops also. Now, in light of these challenges, crop diversification emerges as critical pathway forward. Now, crop diversification generally involves cultivation of different and multiple crops across the field. So that will be helpful for the soil fertility, and that will also increases crop productivity as well. However, if government has been providing MSP for the limited crops, and that will disincentivize farmers for going for crop diversification. However, farmers' hesitation to diversify is rooted in real concerns such as market risks, uncertain returns, and inadequate institutional support. So, however, overcoming such resistance on the part of the farmers requires a combination of measures. These measures include area-specific market studies, financial incentives and transitional support, reliable procurement mechanisms for alternative crops, and providing technical guidance and risk mitigation strategies to the farmers. However, one thing that we should understand, that India is already having buffer stocks of rice. So therefore, we are having a surplus amount of rice. Now, in this context, enabling free export of rice out of the country rather than imposing sudden restrictions would help stabilize the domestic prices and also offer farmers more flexibility. Farmers can sell their produce in the open markets, and they can also get better and remunerative prices for their produce by doing this. So I hope you have understood this topic. And the next very important topic is about the 16th Finance Commission and what local bodies can expect from the 16th Finance Commission. So this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view, this is very important for general studies paper 2. So let's understand about this. Now, in fact, the 16th Finance Commission has submitted its report to the President on November 17 this year. Now, in fact, this report has been raising expectations of resource sharing between union government and states, because the fundamental objective of constituting Finance Commission once in a 5 years by the President is to decide the net proceeds of taxes between the union and state governments. Now, in fact, it is also expected that the 16th Finance Commission will also make recommendations to strengthen finances of panchayats and municipalities as well. Now, in fact, the Union Finance Commission can actually make recommendations to augment the panchayats, augment the resources of the state so that they can distribute a greater amount of finances to panchayats and municipalities. And in fact, the Union Finance Commission is constituted under Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. So therefore, this comes at a time when local bodies are increasingly involved in addressing issues like emergency food aid distribution, right? So let's understand this 16th Finance Commission. Now 16th Finance Commission, so chairman is Arvind Pangaria, and he is also known as Vice Chairman Niti Aayog. Right, so under Article 280 clause 1 of the Indian Constitution, it mandates that president must constitute a Union Finance Commission once in 5 years. Therefore, it is a constitutionally mandated body, and apart from that, it is the body of fiscal federalism because it deals with the distribution of taxes between the center and states. Right, so in fact, the first Finance Commission was set up in the year 1951. This is the brief context of it. So let's understand the core expectations of the 16th Finance Commission first. Now, if you look at the core expectations of the 16th Finance Commission, now states are expecting clarity on the percentage of share of union taxes for the next 5 years. And apart from that, states are also expecting a clarity on the formula for distribution among the states. Right, so apart from that, Article 280 clause 3 subclause B and subclause C, the Finance Commission must recommend measures to augment financial resources of panchayats and municipalities as well. Right, so apart from distribution of tax revenue between the union government and state government, Finance Commission also given the responsibility to recommend measures to augment the financial resources of both panchayats and municipalities which have been constituted under 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts. So therefore, we need to understand one thing here, that these local bodies are constituted under 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, and they provide essential services such as water, sanitation, public health, and even rural roads. So all these services are provided to the people at the rural level. However, in order to provide these services to the people at the grassroots level, they need revenue and finances as well. However, there is a large gap between revenue and expenditure to provide these essential services by these local bodies. However, due to the federal design under 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts, state governments decide the extent of functional responsibilities and revenue handles which are being assigned to the local bodies. So therefore, it has been creating a wide variations all across different states, because the key responsibility in this context has been given to the state legislatures, and state legislatures have been involved in devolution of funds or devolution of the taxation powers to the local self-governance institutions. Very often, the local self-governance institutions, they don't have enough finances with them, and that is the major problem in the functioning of the local bodies. However, states often assign responsibilities without giving adequate tax powers, staff, or fiscal autonomy. Now it has been undermining development and even service delivery as well. Right, now in this context, let's understand issues with state and union finance commissions. So there are several issues. So one such issue is state finance commissions are regularly constituted by the states because it has been mandated by the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, and the responsibility of the state finance commissions is to review the financial position of the state and at the same time distribution of net proceeds of the taxes between the state government and the local bodies. And every state constitute a state finance commission once in 5 years. And in fact, all over India, 100 reports are being submitted so far, but only a few are implemented seriously by the state governments. And in fact, the recommendations made by the state finance commissions, they have suggested revenue sharing, assigning new tax handles, conditional or unconditional grants, or transferring some civic functions and even staff to the local government. So these are some recommendations that the state finance commissions have been made. However, it is up to the state governments to decide whether to implement the recommendations made by the state finance commissions or not. And in fact, the internal resource generation of these local self-governance institutions is also weak. They are excessively dependent on union government and also the state government transfers. This is another major problem. And in fact, these 6 UFC recommendations, Union Finance Commission's recommendations implemented so far, but often ad hoc and unable to assess actual financial needs of the local governments. So let's understand the performance grants problem, because the 13th Finance Commission, 14th Finance Commission, 15th Finance Commission, so they have recommended different inconsistent performance linked conditional grants. So they are actually based on the performance of the local bodies. If local bodies perform well, they will be provided to the local bodies. However, they are very often leading to the frequent policy discontinuity as well. So let's understand about 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, because the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act 1992 created a 3-tier Panchayat Raj system in most of the states. And at the same time, it has even added 11th schedule to the Indian Constitution and Part 9 as well. And this 11th schedule consists of 29 functional matters. However, the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act has empowered municipalities, added 12th schedule with 18 functions. Now, in fact, the functional assignment to the local bodies, the responsibility will be given to the state legislatures. Now, these schedules are illustrative, but they are not mandatory, allowing states full discretion or state legislatures full discretion. For example, the 12th schedule talks about the 11 functional items, and it is up to the state legislative assembly to decide how many of these matters, if they wanted to give full powers to the local self-governance institutions. However, local fiscal powers including property taxes, advertisement tax, market fee, tolls, but these powers vary widely from one state to another state, right? So therefore, in this context, it is very important that panchayats must be empowered by providing them 3F: funds, finances, and functionaries. So that might lead to effective functioning of the local self-governance institutions. But in this context, let's see what the Union Finance Commission has recommended for the local self-governance institutions and for their effective functioning as per the constitutional provision. Now let's understand another very important topic which has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view, this is very important for General Studies paper 3. Now the topic is what changes are planned for the Plant Variety Act. So let's understand what is this Plant Variety Act and what are the changes planned as per this. Now in fact, recently Union Agriculture Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan announced that Centre plans to amend Protection of Plant Variety and Farmers' Rights Act 2001. Now, in fact, this Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act 2001 is India's plant variety protection law, and that creates IPR framework for a new plant varieties, right? So IPR framework involves intellectual property rights, right? So therefore, it deals with the intellectual property rights framework for new plant varieties while also safeguarding farmers' traditional rights as well. Now, in fact, this Plant Varieties, Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act grants breeders and researchers exclusive rights over a newly developed varieties. For example, the BT cotton variety is a newly developed variety. So therefore, it actually talks about giving exclusive rights over these newly developed plant varieties and at the same time safeguarding farmers' traditional rights as well. right? So in fact, it also ensures that farmers can save, use, exchange, sell, and even register their own seeds as well, right? So in fact, the main objective of this legislation, which is Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Right Act, was designed to balance breeder innovation with a long-standing contributions of farmers for conserving and developing plant genetic resources. Now, on the one hand, there are researchers, there are breeders who wanted to invent new species of plants or new varieties of plants which are salt tolerant, drought tolerant, so all these different types of varieties. So on the one hand, protect their innovation and at the same time protect the rights of the farmers. So balancing it is the objective of this Protection of Plant Variety and Farmers' Rights Act. I hope you have understood this. Now, in fact, it has emphasized on the need for balancing the promotion of high yielding, improved crop varieties with preservation of traditional seeds, right? So that's what it has been focused on. So let's understand a key issues being debated in the Plant Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act amendment. Now, in fact, stakeholders are as of now considering revising the definition of variety to include a combination of genotypes, aligning it with the draft seeds bill of 2019. And apart from that, there is also a GERO proposal to broaden the definition of seed to cover the seedlings, tubers, bulbs, rhizomes, roots, tissue culture, plantlets, synthetic seeds, and all these different varieties. So therefore, there is a need to broaden the definition of seed. So this is also aimed at this is also a part of the amendment to the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. And apart from that, the consultations about the amendments to this particular legislation also focuses on clarifying the definition of institution in the term breeder to explicitly include both public and private seed sector entities. However, the committee which has been looking into the possibility of amending this existing legislation is seeking the stakeholder feedback on reforms to distinctness, uniformity, stability test, particularly inclusion of traits in DUS guidelines. However, this DUS training testing is technical process used to evaluate new plant varieties and is the basis for obtaining plant variety protection, right? So therefore, this test, this DUS test, which deals with distinctiveness, uniformity and stability, it determines if a new variety is distinct from all existing known varieties, uniform in its traits, and stable over the subsequent generations. So this test is very important, right? So committee therefore has been seeking feedback on reforms to this DUS testing as well. So I hope you have understood this. And there is an important article that has been given in the Indian Express newspaper, and that has been talking about human activities and pollution, and that threatens India's sea cows. Now, based on this, UPSC has already asked a question about dugong. Now, with reference to dugong, which is also known as sea cow, consider the following statements. It is a herbivorous mammal endemic to Indian Ocean. They are listed in Appendix 1 of the CITES. And 3. India's first conservation reserve is located in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So just try and answer this question, and the correct answer will be provided in tomorrow's class. So thank you so much. Please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like a video. Thank you.